has kindly accepted to share his story with us this evening. Thank you very much, Gyatso.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much, Claire, and thanks for having the patience to want to come here for, I think, a very boring hour, but these talks on wisdom culture, which reminds me of the days when our organization was first formally developed. And I can remember Peter Kedge coming out of a meeting with Lama Yeshe saying, he wants to call it Foundation for the Preservation of Mahayana Tradition, FPMT. And somebody said, sounds like some sort of menstrual disorder. Anyway, FPMT began, and then Lama started naming the new centres developing. Chenrezig Institute for Wisdom Culture, Vajrapani Institute for Wisdom Culture, a mouthful. And we sort of course, we accepted for a while, and then after our newsletters and so on began to drop the for wisdom culture, Chenrezig Institute, Vajrayana. But the wisdom culture was Lama Yeshe's. And of course, that was Lama Yeshe's introduction, and it has so much meaning, as you all know. After some years, Peter again came out. He said, you know what he's going to call the centre in Bodh Gaya? Root Institute for Wisdom Culture. And we're all horrified. But it stuck. Oh, of course, and then the International Mahayana Institute for the Organization of Monks and Nuns. And when we told Lama Lundra the abbreviation IMI, he broke up laughing. Because what he heard was, I am I. So, talks on wisdom culture. Lama Tupten Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche certainly planted the seeds of wisdom in my mind, but they've yet to germinate. But the seeds are there. And what I would like to share with you are some stories of the early days so that you can get some idea of what it was like, particularly when everything was beginning and Lama Tupten Yeshe and Kyabche Rinpoche were so unbelievably skillful in subduing the minds of the most egotistic or egocentric Westerners ever born, I think. And it was Lama Yeshe's power that subdued us, or sort of, and that group of people became the founders of FPMT, and so much that has happened since the early days. So, from my side, when I was 12 years old, no, I won't start that early. I'll start like the beginning. There's a beginning, the middle, and the end. So I just have a couple of photographs. The first one is to illustrate the beginning, a photograph taken in 1970. We have the first photograph on the screen. Do I press a button? Okay. Are we there yet? No. I'm not sure whether... Do I press the computer? Okay. This is in 1970, April 1970, and there are 5 future FPMT Centre directors in that photograph. Do you recognize any? Well, from the right is my brother Max, who became a co-director of Tower Institute some time ago. Then coming back, that's myself in the back. You all know who the guy in the glasses is. Nick Rebush. And the young lady standing at the top of the veranda became known as Yeshi Kadro. At least we're all wearing clothes there. The guy up top is our pilot. At that time, I'd been working in New Guinea as a doctor for a year, and I flew back to Brisbane, where Nick and Marie had that house. We were living in that house, and my brother and the others flew up from Melbourne in a light plane just to pick me up and fly me back to Melbourne. And on the far left is Peter Giuliano, who was director for many years at Tower Institute. So that was 1970. Following that, there's a lot to talk about New Guinea, but I won't. When we got back to Melbourne, I was determined to go to England to study tropical medicine because the year in New Guinea had been so fabulous. And there's a school of tropical medicine in London, and I was going to go to postgrad study there. So I sailed to England as a ship's doctor on a huge cargo ship, refrigerated cargo ship. Had many adventures. We dropped off in Durban, or around the south of Australia, picking up lots of cargo, and then went to Durban to pick up oil. And at that time, the Suez Canal was closed because of the conflict between Egypt and Israel. And so we went up the Atlantic, into the Mediterranean, to Valletta and Malta, and then Piraeus in Greece. And for me, it was a travelling hotel. So in London, I met up with Gary and Chrissy Folks, who I'd been to school with Gary from primary school through secondary school. We were closer than brothers. And Chrissy, also, I'd known her for so long. So we had several friends in London, and I worked in hospitals around London. Then I went to School of Tropical Medicine. And whilst I was there, it was part of London University, and just down the road was the rear entrance of the British Museum. So every lunch break, I'd have lunch, and then I'd do sections of the British Museum over 6 months. And the first room was the Asian room, and they had these Buddhas carved out of granite, giant Buddhas. I knew nothing about Buddhism. I was not into religion whatsoever. But I still remember the power of those tremendous images, which I saw every day because they were the first room. And maybe some imprint. And of course, they're all stolen during the British Raj and so on. And now I think it's such a pity that they're in the back room. They should be in the front room, rather than the marbles that again were stolen from Greece. There was a Swedish doctor, Bengt, who we became good friends, and he called himself a Buddhist Christian, and he was trying to talk me into Buddhism. I was trying to talk him into LSD, but neither of us succeeded at that time. But again, seeds were planted. Then, after another year, actually, I got my diploma in tropical medicine. I worked at another hospital. Gary and Chris had left London and were going back to Australia overland. And they'd got as far as Afghanistan, where they were holed up because of the war with Pakistan. The border was closed. And so they were staying with other travellers in a rented house in Jalalabad, just down from Kabul. This is late 1971 or 72. Early 72. I think Paula was there. Jimmy Neal was there. I'm sure Tricia was there about that time. Anyway, we had lots of adventures in Afghanistan. And then the way to India, the cheapest way, was to go down to Karachi and get a deck passage on a boat coming from the Arabian Gulf, which stopped at Karachi and went to Bombay. I think it was about $5. We could have flown to India from Kabul, but that was $40, which is a huge amount in those days. So when I left England, well, I left because Gary sent me, and Chris sent me all these letters describing life in Jalalabad, and with illustrated drawings of the places. And I was very, very tempted to go, but I'd completed the appointment. I was doing pediatrics, and the hospital requested me very strongly to stay on, and which I should have done in terms of my career, but in terms of the wanderlust, which was very strong in my mind, and these letters from Gary and Chris, I decided to fly to Karachi and then go up the train to Peshawar and then through the Khyber Pass to Jalalabad. We spent about 3 months in Afghanistan. So I suggested, look, I've already seen the railway line. Let's do something interesting. And when we were there, perhaps this is another connection with Buddhism, we went for a trek to these ruins of a Buddhist monastery that had been carved into the cliff beside the Kabul River. And they were beautiful, these deep caves with small meditation things around and irrigation system for water. And of course we took the most popular psychedelic of the day, and whilst enjoying the afternoon, I threw a stick into the river and watched it float downstream. And I just thought of it going into Pakistan, where the Kabul River enters the Indus River, and then the Indus River goes down to Karachi. And we'd crossed the river on a raft. So when I could still my mind with this idea growing, I said to Gary and Chris, look, why don't we build a raft and float down the river to Karachi? Yes, was the immediate reply. So the next picture, if we can have up on the screen. That's our raft. We did it. We went into Pakistan, had lots of adventures, and we bought this little boat, which you can see the name, Tao Indus. Interestingly, my friend Bengt had given me a book on Taoism by Chang Tzu, and I'd become very interested. And at the same time, Gary wrote to me from Afghanistan saying, you must bring a copy of Tao Te Ching. So we were both into Taoism. And also bring a copy of Gurdjieff's Meetings with Remarkable Men. So in Afghanistan, we're in Gurdjieff country. And there's about a dozen travelers from many nations or nationalities living in the house. He also said, whilst you're there, can you bring 50 LSD trips as well? So I arrived from London with all of this contraband, and that's where we're at. But we were opening to the east. And I must say that the people we met traveling in the interior, Islam was very impressive. For me, and for all of us actually, we saw a sincerity and a level of kindness and peace that we were sort of looking for. So gain imprints. So after a very interesting journey down the Indus River, if you see the next photograph, this is what Gary, Chrissy and I looked like. The third picture. So you know who's her. The fourth person is Pakistani. Well, it's Gary and Chris in front, and it's all gone black. And that's myself, top left. Searches after truth. So I call that the beginning. The middle was when Gary and Chris went to look through India, and I went through India quickly to Indonesia and back to Australia. And the middle part was the time in Australia when things sort of didn't go very well at all. My mother died very suddenly, unexpectedly at the age of 52. And it was very difficult re-entering Australia after an incredible time in England and in Pakistan, India, and so on. So things weren't going well. Meantime, Nick and Marie had been travelling through Indonesia, where on the beach at Bali, somebody said, "Oh, you're going to Kathmandu. Can you deliver a letter to a friend of mine at a place called Kopan near Kathmandu?" So they had done that, and they'd met a nun called Anne McNeil, who said, "Oh, look, there's a course just starting. Why don't you stay?" So they stayed, and they never left, cashed in their round-the-world tickets, and eventually became ordained. And Nick started writing these letters to his friends back in Melbourne, unbelievable letters, pages and pages and pages, talking about things called sentient beings, which we had no idea what he was talking about. And Gary and I were convinced that no, we need some land, we're going to start a commune, and we're going to live according to our understanding and rules. Of course, Nick's reply to that, "It's peace of mind you want, not peace of land." So for the fourth course in 72, 18 of Nick's friends went to Kathmandu to attend the fourth course. Gary and I, we stayed back, we didn't go. I was still looking for that piece of land. But I went up to Queensland because Tom and Kathy Victor they were part of our gang in Melbourne, and they had gone up to Queensland and bought their land, and Tom had built a dome. So they asked me if I'd look after their dome while they were attending this Buddhist meditation course in Nepal. So I went up and did that, and the others came and joined me, and we're looking for land. Then people started coming back, including my brother, back from Nepal, from the course. And my brother, don't tell him this. No, I was asking, what was it like? What did those lamas say? And I remember thinking, for the first time in my life, my older brother is talking sense. So more interest was raised. And then Chrissy and Kerry, the lady I was living with, they wanted to go to the next, well, not the next, the sixth course. The fifth, there were 2 courses a year in those days. My younger brother, he went to the fifth, well, he didn't really attend the 5th course. He, with his girlfriend, they were in Boda, where their son was born. And so they went up to Kopan. I think they may have spent a few days there, and they asked Lama Yeshe to marry them. my brother actually told me quite recently that Lama Zopa was horrified because Lama Yeshe agreed, and he said, well, you do 3 prostrations. My younger brother had no idea about how to make a prostration. Anyway, I think this might have been Lama Yeshe's first marriage of somebody, of Western. It wasn't a true marriage, but it was some blessing, you know. So that was the 5th course, and then Kerry and Chrissy went. I went with them together to Singapore and Penang, and my aim was to go to Thailand and work as a doctor in Thailand. And they flew off to Kathmandu. After I was introduced to the opium dens in George Street in Penang. Very interesting experience. Thanks, Chrissy. In Bangkok, I couldn't find work. I had many contacts from the hospital where I'd been working at in Melbourne. So I was given an American doctor, Douglas Burns. I'd given his address. So I rang him up, and he was very happy to see me. And it turned out that he'd been a Buddhist monk for 3 years. And then he'd finished and married a Thai woman, spoke fluent Thai. And he spent the whole day showing me around Buddhist temples in Bangkok. And I looked at him with great, prostrating and making incense offerings. Pretty weird. But he was a really cool guy, and his wife was very beautiful and intelligent, and went home to their place for a meal that night. And I said, I have a friend, or 2 friends, who are becoming ordained in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. He said, Tibetan Buddhism, that's too esoteric. Westerners will never get into Tibetan Buddhism. And somehow I took that as a challenge. So I ended up in Chiang Mai looking up another doctor, and the answer was, you've got to speak the language. There just isn't you just can't come in and find a job. And it was very difficult. So in the hotel in Chiang Mai, I took out a book which Nick had sent to me, and I've been carrying it for a year without ever opening it. And this was the beginning of Nick's involvement in publication. It was a plagiarized text of Geshe Rabten, which Nick republished, The Graduated Path. And I remember in the hotel veranda, I took out the book and said, I'll see what they're into. And I read it from cover to cover, I think 3 times that night. And probably it was the diagram, the elephant, black elephant, and the rabbit, and the monkey, and the yogi chasing the elephant, and then ends up this perfectly white elephant, and the yogi sitting on the back and flying through the sky. And I knew that my mind was pretty black. I also felt that it had the potential to be white. And the imagery, it struck a chord, as well as the graduated path, and the psychology. Also, I was missing Kerry a bit. So I decided, I'm going to Nepal, and went back to Bangkok, got a plane. I arrived in Kathmandu just 3 days before the course. I went to eat at Joe's restaurant, where the sign on the wall said something like, smoking of the hashish is forbidden, or no, not allowed. That's right. And allowed was spelled A-L-O-U-D. And there were some guys sharing a chillum, and I said, do you know a place called Kopan Monastery? Yeah, man, sure. You just catch the bus. Here, have a hit. No, I didn't take a hit. And so I went to Boda, and in those days there was just the stupa with the buildings around it, and then rice paddies. And I just entered the entrance, and there's this incredible stupa. And a taxi pulled up, and it was Chrissy, got out. She'd been shopping, always shopping. And she and Kerry had an apartment there, so I stayed there for 3 days, and then the course started. When I went up to register, I said to Yeshikadro, who was taking the registrations, do you remember me? she didn't. And she looked pretty different too. And so the sixth course, which many of you know, was quite an eventful course. Immediately my objections started rising very strongly. And I became a bit infamous for interrupting Rinpoche and asking all these questions and making comments. The lady who was sitting in front of me, she was an old student. She'd been to a previous course. And she would turn around, "Please don't say that." And then Rinpoche started talking about the 8 worldly dharmas. And after the 10th day, my head was bursting. So I had to go out. I couldn't stay in the tent. It was in a tent in those days. And I went up to the top of the hill at Kopan. And these little Nepalese girls who were looking after some goats, they came and sat beside me. And the goats were nibbling the grass, and the girls had this little bag of the green sweets, and they shared them with me. And I was looking across the paddy fields to Kathmandu. I said, "This is reality." And then I looked round, and I saw a monk who I hadn't seen before looking at us. There was 2 other guys up there. And I saw him disappear, and I knew what was going to happen. And I guessed it was Lama Yeshe. We hadn't seen Lama Yeshe yet. We'd only heard about Lama Yeshe. So I watched this monk walk around the hill, up the top of the hill. He came right. I stood up. At least I had some sort of. I did stand up. And I'd been a big fan of Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan and that story, and which really intrigued me. Lama Yeshe came up and he looked in my eyes. He said, like face here, "If you want power, get down in that tent." So that sort of blew my mind, because power was the search for the warrior in Carlos Castaneda's stories. And how does he know? And I thought, well, if he's so clever, he can read my mind. And I sent a message, "This is reality, not those 8 worldly dharmas." And I said, "No, I can't." So Lama went to the other guys, and then he disappeared. So I did go down, and it was 2 hours overdue with Rinpoche's talk. And the minute I sat down, the talk stopped and lunch was served. So I'll have to make this short. Well, it was a struggle. As I think you've all had the struggle, karma and reincarnation, so difficult. But the psychology was so acceptable. And at the end of the course, Kerry said she was going to take... just at the last day of the course, Kyabje Song Rinpoche came. The first time he'd ever met Westerners. Lama Yeshe had come 2 or 3 times. The first time, his entrance was brilliant. Because we'd all heard about this Lama Yeshe and Lama Yeshe. And so the night he's coming for a talk, incredible anticipation. And we're all looking at the entrance of the tent, waiting. And at the back of the tent, there was this disturbance, and a monk came in and sat in the line of Western monks, had his Zen over his head. And I thought, you're late. Anyway, then suddenly there was this peal of laughter, which you've all heard, hopefully. It was Lama Yeshe. And he got up onto the throne, still laughing, and I thought, that's a good entrance. I like that. And as he did in those days, he blew everybody's mind, making fun of Rinpoche, but just relaxing everybody as he was so skillful at doing. And so by the end of the course, I had generated unbelievable confidence in Lama Yeshe. Rinpoche, I'm not so sure. After 3 days, we'd heard the stories of Rinpoche's reincarnation, his previous life. And during a pee-pee break, I said, Rinpoche. It was the first time I ever spoke to him. I think I might have put my hands together, don't know. I said, Rinpoche, these stories about your previous life, are they true? And he looked at me and he said, yes. How do you know? I asked, because I wanted the scientific proof. And he looked at me and he said, through mental experience, which was the perfect answer. Of course, he could not prove to me reincarnation through his own, but the fact that he knew and through his own mental experience, I thought, that is so powerful, that is so true. So, I mean, it still took me a long time to accept karma and reincarnation. They didn't fit my scientific worldview, but the psychology did. Anyway, when Khyabje Song Rinpoche came, I had so much respect for Lama Yeshe. And Lama Yeshe led him in and assisted him onto the throne. And Song Rinpoche was unbelievable, the wizard, the goatee beard, the eyes, the ears, it was unbelievable presence. And he gave a talk with Lama Yeshe, standing just in front of the throne, very humble, but very good, and translating. Lama Yeshe translated. And that was something. That was really... I had so much respect for Lama Yeshe, and then I saw him showing his respect for his teacher. And I just felt there is something big here. So at the end, Dorian and Alison, Dorian is Nick's younger brother, and Alison was his girlfriend at that time. Myself and Kerry, we all went to a hotel in Kathmandu and got stuck into samsara. Pies, smoking. And Kerry took refuge, against my advice. Oh, that was too quick. But anyway, we went to Pokhara, and then Kerry and I, we went to Dharamsala, where I'd heard about the Tibetan Medical Centre, and I went to Dr. Doma, a lady doctor who was there, who was quite well known, and I asked her, would she teach me Tibetan medicine? She agreed, and I spent a few days with her just attending her clinics and beginning to learn. And I think what impressed me most, when I just come from working in a hospital in Melbourne, with the busy outpatients, everything, and the patients are treated as diseases rather than individuals. And I could see that her therapeutic, what the basis of her therapeutic power was her love for her patients and their love for her. It was unbelievable. You don't get taught this in medical school in Melbourne. But I also realised that Tibetan medicine is based on Buddhist teachings, and to really learn I have to speak Tibetan, and to make the effort of speaking Tibetan I'd have to be convinced in Dharma. So I said to Kerry, look, I've got to go back to the West. This is too big. I've got to check up. So she stayed in India, and I went overland back all the way to England, and it was good because I retraced a lot of places I've been in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and I was seeing them through Buddhist eyes. I didn't realize I was seeing them through Buddhist eyes, but I was learning so much. When I got to England, I met another friend, and we ended up living together. And she had 2 kids, and for me it was sort of instant domestic situation, which was great. And take the kids to school and bake bread and stuff. I was working in hospitals around London. But she was very much involved in the left-wing political movement, as well as other friends, and who were members of the WRP, the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And there was an election happening. And so there's a lot of, and we were in the pubs and parties, there was all these political debates. And the Trotskyists were against the Leninists, and the Leninists were against the Marxists were against somebody else. There's all this unbelievable anger, okay? And I found myself always talking from the Buddhist point of view. What's going on? And so that sort of, there was an election meeting in Hackney, in a school in Hackney. We were living in a squat in Bethnal Green, and Hackney, I think, is the next suburb. So there was an election meeting, and Vanessa Redgrave belonged to the Workers' Revolutionary Party, and she was giving a talk. And so they were talking this capitalist enemies, etc., etc. And I looked the part. I had a blue duffel coat, beard, hair. I was a good lefty. And so I stood up and I said, "Look, what is your party's policy on capital punishment?" And Vanessa Redgrave answered. She said, "Oh, the capitalists have been using this against the workers for years and years, etc., etc." And I can't remember exactly the sequence, but the other guy on the stage, an old communist, he said, "What are you, some sort of Jesus freak? Shut up and sit down." But the audience, they backed me. They said, "No, let him talk." So then I came to my point. I said, "Look, all the people in London out there, the capitalists, which you hate so much, they are not going to accept your revolutionary policy. They're going to fight to the death to prevent you." And I said, "Who's going to do the killing? You or the people here? All the wharfies in the audience." And I said, "Can't you see that your problem is your hatred, your anger, your greed?" And then I thought, "Uh-oh, here we go again. There's Lama Zopa." Anyway, so I can't remember how it finished, but I felt glad that I'd expressed myself. And that night, so in bed, Claire, the lady I was living with, she was sort of debating from, that we've got to fight the capitalists and how bad they were. And I said, I think I might have to go back to India. I've got to really be convinced about this Buddhism. And I'd still been writing letters to Kerry, and she had met Goenkaji, and he was giving some of the Vipassana retreats in Benares. So it was very difficult whether to leave that very comfortable, very pleasant situation in London and go back to India to find out about Buddhism. So I went to my favourite place in London, Kew Gardens, to make a decision. And it didn't take any psychoactive substance. The flowers turned me on, still do. And so I just walking around thinking, and this gardener came up and talking to me. Gardeners, in England, strangers don't talk to you, but he was German. So, and I told him, I figured how it came out. I said, "Look, I've got this decision whether to stay in London and this lovely lady and situation, or go back to India to learn about Buddhism." He said, "Well, I was a Buddhist monk for 3 years in Thailand." And now I spend my life travelling the world, working in botanical gardens and so on. I think you should go back to India. Anyway, it happened. I went back and I did 2 courses on end with Goenkaji in Benares, which were very powerful. And then after that, Kerry stayed on for a third 10-day course, and I and a group of people on Christmas morning, we caught the train to Gaya, and then a donker, horse and cart to Bodh Gaya. And when I saw the Mahabodhi Stupa through the trees, I had such an impression. So we stayed at the Burmese Vihara and walking around, going to the stupa. In those days, it was empty. There was nobody there. There was beautiful green lawn under the Bodhi tree, and you could sit there all day and meditate, and you wouldn't see anybody. It was just so peaceful and quiet. And I was thinking about karma and reincarnation, and I finally became convinced that these were valid. I couldn't prove it, but they were not contradictory to all that I knew. I decided to take refuge, sitting under the Bodhi tree. And Berakensi Rinpoche was there, Kagyu Lama, he was giving a Chenrezig initiation, and I said, "Look, I want to take refuge." And he said, yeah, you can attend the initiation and take refuge. And so that's how it happened. Then my life changed because I decided to go to South India, so first to Calcutta. And I got a reservation on the train without even waiting. And in India, it's so hard to get a sleeper on the train. I thought, this must be the power of refuge. Anyway, I went back to Australia, and I timed it. I knew that Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche were on their second visit to us, a third visit to Australia, I think. And they were, Lama Yeshe gave a week's retreat in Dramana, near Melbourne, on the coast. So I attended that, and then I drove to Bega and picked up Gary and Chris, and we drove up to Queensland for the first course at Chinrezi Institute, which is a full-on 1-month Kopan-style course with Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe. And after that, I said to Lama, I said, look, I'm really convinced I want to do some retreat. So he gave me a lot of instruction, and a friend and I, in a week, we built a cabin in the rainforest near Coffs Harbour, and I did 3 months retreating on Lumrim and Chinrezi. And after that, there was no longer a question or a doubt in my mind. I wrote to Lama and said, not can I become a monk, but when can I become a monk? And he said, come to Kopan if other people wanting to take ordination. So I had a few months, and I had to get some money, so I worked at a hospital and left the hospital just a few days before the course and flew to Kopan, carrying mostly the stuff that Nick had ordered to carry, you know, the tape recorders and stuff. And Lama Yeshe gave a Rabjung ordination to myself, Elizabeth Drukier, Karen, Roger, Margaret, Scott Brousseau, Roger Wheeler, and another lady who, can't remember her name, she went off to the Kyrgyz. She did many 3-year retreats. So we joined the community of monks and nuns at Kopan, and there were about 36 monks and nuns at that time at Kopan. And after we'd taken the Rabjung ordination, our group, Lama Yeshe said, from now on, I'm your mummy, I'm your daddy, I'm your boyfriend, I'm your girlfriend. I will give you everything you need. And that was very powerful. We really, well, I didn't have any concept of what the proper relationship between a disciple and a guru was, but I had no question, no doubt that Lama would do this. So he set us up. We all had our own gompa and our own kitchen, and we all took jobs almost very quickly. Roger was given the job to work with Marcel to try and raise some money. And that's when IMI sort of became into existence. So it raised some money for the monks and nuns. And during that time, we were so fortunate to have such close connection with Lama and Rinpoche. Lots of anecdotes. One morning we used to do puja at 5 o'clock in the morning till 7:30, and Georgia, and we'd have breakfast in the middle, and one of the monks and nuns would prepare breakfast and serve it during the puja, which we'd eat in silence. One morning, Lama Yeshe came in. He'd cooked breakfast for us, and apparently he'd asked Peter Kedge, what do Westerners eat for breakfast? And of course, Peter described a typical English breakfast, which not all Westerners eat. But, so Lama served with fried eggs and toast and cheese and all English breakfast. And we were stunned. Lama didn't say anything. He just served it. But later he said, you people have to eat properly. You have Western body, Western mind. You've got to eat Western food. Don't be hippies and sleep on the floor. Like we were all sleeping on just thin grass mats on the floor. It was very rugged in those days. And he said, you must go to Kathmandu and you get proper mattress, and etc. He really, as Geshe Choni said the other day, he was very firm, but incredibly kind, looking after our every need. And, as always, we need money. And not long after ordination, I said to Lama, I sent the message via Marcel. I said, Lama, I can go back to Melbourne and get a job as a doctor and get, quite a lot of money, and we can use it for Kopan. And so the message came back from Lama Yeshe, good idea. Dr. Adrian, he can decide. So I thought about it for a couple of days. And then I sent a message back with Marcel saying, well, I better not go back. I'm just new and I should. And then, so the reply again was a day later when I was walking down to Bodhanath and the taxi went past with Lama Yeshe in the front seat and it stopped and Lama Yeshe indicated to me to get in the back. So we continued driving. Then Lama Yeshe turned around. I hear you make good decision. Melbourne is the heart of your samsara. You stay here and you get strong. So that's the way he taught. He would let us make decisions, and even if we made mistakes, well, he would help us get over the mistake. If we made the right decision, then he would congratulate us. But he kept putting us in a situation where we had to decide. As Cherry or Annie Chodan, she said she once saw Lama Yeshe come out of a room. A Western had been there asking questions, and Lama Yeshe was sort of telling her, use your own wisdom, dear. Next thing you'll be asking me if you can go to the toilet. So often, use your own wisdom. And it was Lama's, of course it was the wisdom, the seeds that they had, wisdom culture, the seeds that they'd implanted in our mind. When I did that first retreat, before I decided to become ordained, Lama had said, if you have any questions, you write me a letter. Well, I was out in the middle of the Australian bush. There was no way I could send a letter. I didn't see anybody. There was nobody coming. But still, when questions came up, I began to write letters. And I know I was meditating on the Lamrim, and I never finished a letter because when you write a letter, you verbalize, you formulate the question, and the answer was so obvious in the Lamrim. And again, that's how Lama taught. Rinpoche gave us the Lamrim, and Lama taught us how to put the Lamrim into action, to incorporate it into your mind and your approach to the world. So it was tremendous. More anecdotes. Some of you probably read my book. Not long after, a few months after we took Rabjung, our group, including Wendy Finster and Peter Kedge, we all took Gyatso ordination at Tushita Retreat Centre in Dharamsala with Kyabje Trijang Rinpoche. And then Lama had given us the Mahakala initiation as special meditation for the Sangha. And so I did the retreat, and Lama, the night before, I spent an unbelievable time with Lama. He was explaining how to do the retreat, and he took the aspect of Mahakala. I can't imagine his face. So, the next morning, breakfast was delivered. One fried lady's finger, that horrible vegetable, which is like a long piece of mucus. And I was looking at the plate totally, how can I do retreat with food like this? And I was thinking that, and that minute, the window, it was Rinpoche's room, actually. Rinpoche had gone to South India, so I inherited his room. And the window was pushed open, and Lama Yeshe's hand came in the window with one of these round Tibetan breads covered in Vegemite. Didn't say a word. I took it and I thought, I will never complain about the food again. So that was the way of Lama's teaching. After 4 years at Kopan, then Lama asked me to go to Melbourne to become the teacher at Tara Institute, or Tara House in those days it was called. And just prior to going, I went up to Laudo for the Nyungnes with Rinpoche. A lot of people went up. And at one time I went into Rinpoche's cave, and he had another Sherpa Lama, and Rinpoche introduced him as being, this is the most perfect mo maker. His mo's are never mistaken. Do you have any questions? So, I didn't even know what a mo was, and I didn't have much faith anyway in rolling dice. So I thought, well, I'm soon going to Melbourne in Australia, what will it be like? And the mo came out difficult in the beginning, better in the middle, difficult in the end. And it was. But it was a good opportunity to meet the heart of my samsara. And I survived. And then Lama, he came and visited in the end of the first year, and Ian Green, his father had actually offered the land, not just this bit of land, 150 acres, but 500 acres. And to us to use as a retreat centre for $2. And I was Carol Davies. She was a nun from Western Australia. She and I were great buddies. She'd helped me lead my first Lamrim course, which I'd led at Kopan in 1979, the 1-month course. Don't know how, but I did it. And she came to Melbourne, and so she was helping. And we loved this land. The director at Tara didn't like it and went to all these mows to try and get other places. And Kyabje Trujillo Rinpoche's mo came out not so suitable, or not yet, or some problems. And so when Lama Yeshe came to Melbourne, I told him about the mows. And his root guru, Kyabje Trujillo Rinpoche, said, not so good. And Lama said to me, oh, I don't believe in mows. Let's go for it. So here we are. And so you know the story of how all this happened. When Lama came and looked over. In the meantime, I pleaded to go back to Nepal, so Lama let me go. Scott Brusso took over at Tara Institute. He's been in Queensland for a while. And so in Nepal, I did the course, the November course, and then in early January I went to Bodh Gaya, and Carol, who sort of followed, she came from Kopan later with a letter from Lama Yeshe telling me to go to France to start a monastery. And so I had to go to Dharamsala to meet him. And in Dharamsala, I was ushered into Lama's room, tiny little room, those days, tiny, 2 meters by 2 meters. And there was 2 small beds. Lama was sitting on one, Rinpoche was sitting on the other, and I sat on the floor between them. And he explained that Elizabeth had bought this falling down mansion out of money that half the money which had come from the burning down of the one of the wings of Vajrayogini Institute, and Lama wanted to make it a monastery for his monks and nuns. And he asked me to go and set it up, to be the director, and so I was sitting, okay, Lama. And then he said, and how are you going to support the monks and nuns? Me? I didn't say it, but it's your monastery. How are you going to give them food? And I was a bit taken aback. And then Rinpoche started, what are you going to do? You're going to... And I said, oh. And my immediate thought was, well, Lord Buddha said that if his monks and nuns keep pure Vinaya, they will never go hungry. So, I didn't actually say that, but that was in my mind. And then Lama Yeshe said to Loza Nyima, his attendant, something, and Loza Nyima went out and came back and gave him an ingot of silver. And Lama Yeshe took it. And of course, one of the monks and nuns' vows is to not touch gold or silver. And Lama Yeshe started throwing it up in the air and catching it. How are you going to support the monks and nuns? We'll grow vegetables, Lama. Bah! You can't grow vegetables. After a while, I think you make business. So Nick and Trish, I think, were in Delhi at that time. They were buying used saris and making these silk clothing out of the saris, see-through shirts and stuff. So we got a consignment I eventually got to Nalanda. Oh yes, that's another thing. What are you going to call the monastery? Oh, I don't know, Lama. What are you going to call it? And he said, I think we call it Nalanda. So I ended up going to Nalanda, and I was there alone, and it was very beautiful, springtime. And we ended up doing business with selling see-through clothing to young ladies on the French Riviera in the street market, where they completely rejected the changing cabin that we had and just stripped off on the street. And we didn't make much money, we didn't lose much money. This was Lama's way of dealing with it. We were the Sangha, we were starting, we were new. Nalanda grew, Lama came several times. His Holiness came. And then, after 4 years, Lama was showing signs of sickness, and as you know the story, Lama manifested giving up this body, of that life, which I feel was, a teaching on death and impermanence. And I'm totally convinced that his recognized reincarnation, Lama Tenzin Oso, is indeed Lama Tupnyeshi's mind in that new body. A lot happened. I was in we saw Lama Oso was only a few weeks old as CPMT meeting near Munich, in Germany, at Aryatara. Again, CPMT. And there was this little baby, Maria had this little baby, and we all ignored it because it was just another little baby. But that was Lama Yeshe. Within weeks of being born, he was at a CPMT meeting. Amazing. But I didn't see him again until he was 6 years old, when he came to Taipei, and I was at the apartment, which was the first center in Taiwan, and I took over from Tupan Döndup, who had been there for a couple of years, and Basili and Marcel and Lama Oso came, and I immediately said, this is not... I was suspicious, and he latched onto me immediately, got out of the airport. And that evening I was chopping vegetables for food, and he was playing games, like hiding vegetables. And so I hid a capsicum in my robes, and then I produced it and chopped it. And where did that come from? He said. I said, magic. And he looked at me with scorn. You can't make magic. Okay. So during the visit, there were fantastic experiences, but one time he said, Ven Gyatso, who gave you that name? I said, you did, Lama. Oh, when I was Lama Yeshe. Yes. Oh, from now on, forever and ever, you are called Tenzin Nyima. Nyima means son. And then he said to Basili, what does Tenzin mean? So he called me Tenzin Nyima all the time. And at the end of the visit, he was leaving, and somehow he and I were eating a pizza together at the airport, and he was looking at me, and he said, Tenzin Nyima, I have new name for you. And I thought, the thought went through my mind, if this is Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, I know exactly what he's going to say. And I said, oh yeah, Tenzin Pizza. How did you know? How did you know? I said, magic. So, and again, more recently, just a few years ago, when I gave the course at Kopan. Ursel came and stayed at Kopan. He doesn't want to be called Lama anymore. And I asked him to give a talk to the people during the course. It was about 2 weeks into the course. And he said, I'm not sure. Anyway, later on, he came up to my room and we talked about what I'd been teaching, and he agreed to give a talk. And one thing, when he was in Taipei, we'd gone to an animal releasing ceremony, and prior to releasing animals, or we'd walked along the lake, and there was a guy fishing, and this little 6-year-old boy sort of was looking, and he said, "Why are you doing this?" And through the translator, the fisherman said, "Because I enjoy it." And he said, "Well, all these little fish, they're swimming around very happily, and you hook them out and you kill them and eat them. Do you think they enjoy that?" And when that was translated, the group of students sort of all laughed. And Ursel, he took my hand and walked away from the crowd. He said, "Why did they laugh when I asked about the fish?" And I said, "Lama, that's why you're here." So, back to Kopan a couple of years ago, when I asked Lama Ursel to talk to the people, and he came to my room, we talked about what he'd say. And then he stood up to go, and he gave me a big hug, and he said, "I think this is why I'm here, to talk to the people." Anyway, he was a knockout. They loved him. I loved him. I was crying because it was Lama Yeshe. What he did, taking the mickey out of me, and Buddhism, but it was pure Dharma. He said, "I'm not a Buddhist. I don't know anything about Buddhism," but it was pure Dharma, about love, relationships, compassion, where the students were at. And so it was very warming, and I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Lama Tup Nyeshe's mind is now in this new body, and he's doing what he did as Lama Yeshe. Why was Lama Yeshe so successful? Because he studied us, how we think, how we spoke, everything that we did. He learned, and then he taught our language, and he used it perfectly, and he communicated with us. The hippie language, all the colloquialisms, he knew exactly what they meant. He once said to Peter Kedge, Peter Kedge, a well-educated Englishman, "I speak better English than you." And I really feel that Lama Ursel is doing the same. He told me, when he was here, when Rinpoche manifested sickness last time, Ursel was here, and he said to me, for 3/4 of an hour, he told me the whole reasons of what he was doing, why he left Sarah. And he wants to experience what his generation has experienced so he can communicate directly to them. Visually, audio visually, and so on. And it was so moving. And I am convinced that that's what he's doing now, and I have total confidence. We were talking about the future of FPMT. It's rosy. And I don't think we're going to dump everything on top of Lama Ursel, but he will be there, and he will ensure that whatever happens, the wisdom energy of Lama Tup Nyeshe will continue. The last photograph, I think there's just this is beginning, middle, and end. So this is the end. After my doubt of becoming a monk or not, I think it was a photograph taken in Bodh Gaya in '78. Can you find it? Number 4. That one. That's it. That's the monk. And look, there are lots of events. I know Geshe Chöni was asked to talk about challenges to ordination. Well, I'm looking at a very pretty lady, and that was a challenge to my ordination. Lama Yeshe helped me overcome that in an incredibly compassionate way. And So, look, that's just a little of what I can share with you. And I just feel so fortunate and privileged to have met the lamas and to be able to play a little part in the actualization of their great vision. Both, Rinpoche and Lama Tut Nyeshe and all the other, like Geshe Techok, Khensa Rinpoche, Geshe Techok, who came to Nalanda, he was our abbot. And for 6 years, that's when I had my formal education from Geshe Jabba Techok. He was just 100% behind Lama Yeshe and doing exactly what Lama Yeshe asked him to do. And that is such a great FPMT Geshe approach, 100%. And I don't know what karma I created. It wasn't in this life, but very fortunate, and that's it. So thank you very much for listening, and please continue your excellent work of what you're doing. It's, I just catch a glimpse of Gyalmo in Mongolia. I know what Mongolia is like. I know how hard it is, but how wonderful it is, and how rewarding. And for each of you in the centres, look, the hard times, they will, you'll get over them. One time at Nalanda, I was totally falling apart, and somebody came up to my room. They just come from Nepal and said, "Oh, I've got a message from Rinpoche," and it was some pills, some blessed pills, and written in Rinpoche's hand. From, I think, something like from Zopa's room at Kopan, down to Kathmandu, to the airport, through the aeroplane to France, then up the stairs into Dr. Adrian's room and into his heart. And Peter Kedge told me a similar story when he was asked to renovate Tushita and look after all these Indian coolies, etc. And he was at the point of giving up, and he received a telegram from Lama Yeshe down at McLeod Gunj at the post office, and the telegram read, "You've come a long way, baby, but you've still got a long way to go." And Lama had seen that in an advertisement in a Time magazine. But it just comes when you need it. Look, we are being looked after, no question. Thank you so much.
Gyatso, we are so fortunate and privileged that you shared that with us. Many, many thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
How many books have been written by Gyatso?
Oh, the personal story is called Leaf in... Sorry.
Yeah, use this.
Personal story.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Leaf in the Wind. Unfortunately, it's out of print. Dr. Nick is going to put it out as an e-book as soon as I finish revising it, which may not happen until next year. And The Perfect Mirror, a book, collection of articles I wrote in Mongolia, Nick will put that out soon, thanks to John Waite, who's going to sponsor it. And another one I'm working on, the Blue Book from Kopan, I've got to revise that.